This is the digital age. Hello, YouTube. So chapter 18 is describing these different modes of nature in quite detail in terms of knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the knower. And when I read this verse for Bhagavatam, or these two verses, it kind of dawned on me that this topic or this theme of impetus, right? In this chapter 18 of Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada talks about impetus and what impetus is. So I wanted to kind of dive into impetus, and I was observing a connection between this concept of thinking, feeling, and willing, right? And this knowledge, object of knowledge, and the knower. And because it's interesting, right? Like, what is our impetus? It's describing here in Bhagavatam that persons in the mode of passion are motivated by this economic condition of their family, of society, of the nation. Right? And a person in this situation, that's, as we are experiencing societally, is very ephemeral and very unstable. The economy is tanking. Societally, we can't have all the social functions that we want. Economically, a lot of people are out of work. You know, there's people that are saying that this is going to rival the Great Depression. You know, this material world is consistently and constantly unstable. And we see that when I'm taking shelter of the mode of passion, I'm constantly in a place because these things will at some point stop, as they have for many people. Right? So then what do we do? What is my impetus? So then in the mode of passion, in the mode of ignorance, the impetus then becomes these trivargikas. I mean, he's speaking of a Vedic person who's engaged in kama, moksha, economic development. Persons in the mode of passion, when these other things, when I can't deal with, then I have, and there's not a whole bunch of facility to do karma necessarily. So then it's kama. That's what we have left, because persons, generally speaking, are not actually interested in moksha. Right? Prabhupada says they're not interested in hearing the activities of Krishna, the divine activities of Krishna, because in one sense, it's so divine in illusion. It's imaginary. Oh, those are stories, right? Recently I was listening to this podcast, Wisdom of the Sages, highly recommended for anyone online or anyone in general. It's a podcast that's being put on by Raghunath Prabhu and Kishore Prabhu from the Bhakti Center. And it's just dynamic as anything. And in the Wisdom of the Sages, Kishore Prabhu was mentioning, this was an older episode, but he was mentioning that there's different ways that we can approach Krishna Lila, that we can approach Srimad Bhagavatam. Right? Some people say, oh yeah, it's just mythology, right? As a way to kind of avoid the responsibility of what's being said or what's being spoken about. And I don't remember all the categories that he said, but it's just mythology, and then it's mythology with a moral story or with like some moral value, or it's I'm forgetting, but the point being is that there's different ways that and that allows me to kind of do whatever I want. I can appreciate maybe, right? And then it gets to the point where devotees in this elevation of how do we understand Krishna Lila, devotees they not only see it as historical accounts, historical activities that took place that have moral stories within them, embedded within them, but also are opening a door for devotees to enter into some kind of relationship or an experience, right? But so what is our thinking, feeling, and willing? He's describing in this purport that the economic condition, the social thing, right? Whether I succeed or whether I fail, whether I'm feeling happy, whether I'm feeling sad. So I was observing that you could draw a connection between this idea of thinking, feeling, and willing, which is what impetus is, between knowledge, object of knowledge, and the knower, which is what Krishna is describing in these first few verses of the 18th chapter to Arjuna. So for the thinking aspect, we can go to verse 18:20 through 22. And Uddhava, can you read that for us? Just the translations.
That knowledge by which one undivided spiritual nature is seen in all living entities, though they are divided into innumerable forms, you should understand to be in the mode of goodness. That knowledge by which one sees that in every different body there is a different type of living entity, you should understand to be in the mode of passion. And that knowledge by which one is attached to one kind of work as the all in all, without knowledge of the truth, and which is very meager, is said to be in the mode of darkness.
Right, so we have goodness. We see this underlining, undivided spiritual nature. Right. On one level, Krishna is describing, because even in the mode of goodness, it's a type of conditioning. So Krishna is describing this kind of initial Brahman realization, this kind of initial impersonal understanding of this kind of spiritual nature that underlies everything that we exist. It's a condition, and at the same time, you're seeing something divine and greater than just kind of the immediacy of the situation, right? So it's kind of, it's this thinking aspect or this knowledge aspect is what is my foundation from which I'm basing my impetus on, right? So in the mode of passion, we see that every different body is a different soul, right? That, or even to the extent of that there is no soul. That's ultimately what Prabhupada explains in the purport, is that living entities don't actually see an individual soul, they just see the body in the mode of passion. I just see the body and say, okay, well, you're an American, you're within every of these different bodies, right? Nor do they recognize a higher supreme soul. And then in the mode of ignorance, it's narrow-minded. My thinking is closed down. My thinking is closed to just kind of one option, very much based on the lower impulses of the body and of the mind. Right? Prabhupada writes in the purport that God for them is money, and satisfaction of the bodily demands is knowledge. Right? So there's a way in which that if I can just satisfy my body, then that's what knowledge is, and that's what success is, which is characteristic a little bit of passion as well. Okay, then the next one for feeling, we'll skip to 1826 and 28 if you're following at home. And we can have the node read that one for us. This is for feeling.
One who performs his duty without association with the modes of material nature, without false ego, with great determination and enthusiasm, and without wavering in success or failure, is said to be a worker in the mode of goodness. The worker who is attached to work and the fruits of work, desiring to enjoy those fruits, and who is greedy, always envious, impure, and moved by joy and sorrow, is said to be in the mode of passion. And expert in insulting others, and who is lazy, always morose, and procrastinating, is said to be a worker in the mode of ignorance.
Right, so in goodness, because of, from that thinking foundation, or at least from that knowledge foundation, we understand that there's a higher spiritual nature. Right? So there's actually a deeper sense of what I'm doing and why I'm doing nature. Without the kind of